Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first plenary of the FDP May meeting. So to start off, I'm just going to give a couple of Zoom webinar reminders. So if you experience any technical issues, please call 1-888-799-9666 and choose option 2. Your audio will be streamed through your speakers, and you can submit any questions you have during the presentation in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. This webinar will be recorded and the slides and session summaries will be posted on our website, thefdp.org, shortly after the meeting. So now I'm going to pass it off to Melissa Korf to introduce this session and our speakers.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And thank you to everyone for joining us today for a wonderful plenary session to talk through institutional and sort of national infrastructure needs to support data management and sharing best practices. I am so pleased to be able to introduce our first speaker for the session, Dr. Martin Halbert, who is the NSF Science Advisor for Public Access. In this role, he leads the programmatic activities of the National Science Foundation aimed at advancing the understanding and adoption of open science practices, utilizing public access mechanisms and agency efforts to ensure that research products arising from NSF-funded projects are publicly accessible. He has an interdisciplinary PhD from Emory University, and his research and primary areas of expertise include digital scholarship in the humanities, research library services, and building interinstitutional collaborative alliances for new research functions. He has previously worked for Emory University, Rice University, UT Austin, UNC Greensboro, the University of North Texas, and the IBM Corporation. He's been principal investigator for grants and contracts totaling more than $7 million, funding more than a dozen large-scale collaborative projects among many educational institutions, with a special focus on information systems and digital humanities. He's served as Dean of Libraries at both the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and the University of North Texas. He founded Educopia Institute, an educational nonprofit that advances the well-being of libraries by fostering the advancement of shared information systems and infrastructures. And he led one of the founding projects of the US National Digital Preservation Program, beginning in the first years of the 21st century. And he's taking valuable time out of his schedule during a very robust review cycle to join us today to share the NSF perspective. Thanks so much, Dr. Halbert.
Delighted to be here, Melissa, and apologies if I am a little scattered. I am in the middle of hosting and running 6 different review panels. But let me see if I can get my slides up and we'll get going. I was delighted to be invited by Melissa and others running this program to introduce and start this panel with some perspectives from the National Science Foundation, but leading into the very important presentations of my colleagues Ishwar and Bob after me. This, I'll say, also was a rather daunting topic to try to speak to, given the range of activities currently underway in the federal agency space to build and maintain data management and sharing infrastructures. I can only offer you some highlights of these efforts today. They are way too big to even cover or attempt to canvass in a short presentation. I'm just going to give you some highlights and issues that I think are important to keep in mind in this consideration. Let me start with a very basic framing point that data, just to take a big step back, data is central to virtually all scientific research and societal communications today. In many ways, working with data is simply synonymous with any kind of activity in these spaces. So in this talk, I'm going to focus on the more constrained focus of efforts to systematically manage and curate data sets. And when I say a data set, I mean a collection of data together with the associated code books and other relevant documentation needed for use. Now, my perspective is certainly from the National Science Foundation. We have a somewhat unique perspective on these issues in that our remit includes support for all fields of fundamental science and engineering, and we're spread across all the different areas of basic research covered by America's colleges and universities. We fund approximately 1/4 of all federally funded basic research in academia. In many fields, such as mathematics and computer science, we're the primary source of federal funding. As a result, I've realized that we have a somewhat broader and especially more distributed, for various reasons I'll get into, perspective on this issue than some other federal agencies, which are also, though, very, very broad. But let me say a few words about NSF's involvement with basic data management infrastructure. Well, to start with, NSF funds major facilities and infrastructure that really do span the globe. There are dozens of different major installations and instrumentation programs that NSF funds throughout the 7 different disciplinary directorates that make up the National Science Foundation. Again, even a quick scan of the major portions of these facilities would take far longer than I've got, but it as a result, our perspective tends to be pretty distributed because each one of these facilities and infrastructure programs represent a major accumulation of data and data cyber infrastructure related activities. So we have to try to coordinate and orchestrate all of these activities within NSF. To say a very basic point about it, though, NSF has had for more than a decade in place a requirement around data management plans. Starting in January of 2011, NSF implemented a data management plan requirement, and all proposals to NSF must include this DMP. And I can say unequivocally, having just, as of panels I ran yesterday, that the quality of the DMPs submitted with proposals are an important consideration in the evaluation of those proposals and can make the difference, and in fact did in some of our discussions yesterday, made the difference in deciding whether or not to fund a proposal. I want to go back to a really seminal moment, just to recap and mark its importance. This was the Holden Memorandum of 2013, issued by then Director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, John P. Holden, that was entitled Increasing Access to the Results of Federally Funded Scientific Research. It called out the importance of sharing and making publicly available results of federally funded research, such as peer-reviewed publications and digital data. It directed agencies that issue more than $100 million in awards per year to develop a plan for increasing public access through these sorts of public access mechanisms. And it resulted in many responses among agencies. Obviously, this had a context, and there was a long-standing, more than 2 decades, even at that point, of activities to reposit and make publicly available data in various distributed repositories. That Holden Memorandum, I call it out because I think it represented the first broad consensus and commitment on the part of the federal government that publicly funded research products should be made publicly accessible, and it's informed much of our responses at NSF. Notably, the plan that led to my program that I'll talk about in a minute or two, the NSF 1552 plan, Today's Data, Tomorrow's Discoveries, issued in 2015 under then NSF Director France Cordova, with report leadership by Amy Friedlander and contributions of many others in NSF. Now, it resulted in a variety of agency responses, notably, though, requirements in the NSF Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, the PAPG, which just sort of formed, it's sort of our Bible in structuring grant proposals and our process of peer reviewing them and so forth. Without going through all this text, the upshot of it is that researchers, by applying to NSF, they incur the obligation, if they are funded, to publicly share their results of their research, notably primary data, samples, physical collections, publications, and a variety of other research outputs. This is a very fundamental commitment on the part of NSF and has led to a range of realizations on our part that really what we're looking at is an emerging ecosystem of cyber infrastructure and data in the range of research activities that we fund. This is a report from the group that NSF, within NSF that I am a part of, the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure, a report entitled, as you can see, Transforming Science Through Cyber Infrastructure. I would encourage people to take a look at it. It was our attempt to try to, in broad brushstrokes, describe this really large, emerging, interactive ecosystem of cyber infrastructure and data. We feel that this is a key catalyst for discovery and innovation today in the 21st century. And our aim is to do our part in helping cultivate an agile, integrated, robust, trustworthy, and sustainable cyber infrastructural system that can drive new research. I'd be remiss if I didn't call out my colleagues in the OAIC. That we are quite a diverse bunch, and we range in all sorts of different programs, ranging from, at the high end, the LCCF, the Leadership Class Computing Facility, a $600 million in infrastructural investment that was recently made, all the way down to the variety of programs that you see represented here by program officials. To say just a word about my own program and the infrastructure that I oversee, the development of, in addition to the grant programs that I oversee, the NSF Public Access Repository has been in steady development since 2015. In 2020, we really concretized all of the functions around depositing and making publicly accessible juried articles. Last year, we added the capability to record publicly researched data sets. This year, we're focusing on a range of other research product types. And in 23, we'll be moving on to various kinds of interlinkages between systems. And again, all of this is a very broad brushstroke coverage of these issues. And I think I skimmed through a slide. Where is it? Well, all right. I'm going to keep moving in the interest of time because I do want to get to the other presenters. This is a recent solicitation that I coordinated issuing within NSF. It is an all-agency solicitation around the FAIR data guiding principles and open science, and basically asking for coordination networks of among research groups to advance the state of the art in the FAIR data guiding principles and open science principles and practices, especially as regards data and the coordination and sharing of data. As you can see, all the different disciplinary directorates of NSF are participating in it. The deadline was April 12th, and that is the review panels that I'm leading this week. So we've had a tremendous response. We had some 71 different proposals coming into the program, and it has been absolutely fascinating to see the responses. I think it will be really, we hope that the outcomes of this program will be very catalytic. Let me highlight just a few developments that I think are very interesting in the field and that are examples of things that agencies can coordinate around over the past decade in this emerging ecosystem that I've been describing, that we in the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure have been concerned with and interested in fostering. There is this amazing new array of not only federally funded programs, but independent repository services, which have acted in a very interesting way as a new category of stabilizing functions for persistent identification, deposit, discovery, all sorts of functions that fill a variety of gaps in this ecosystem that have bedeviled previous efforts to foster interoperation between repositories. I think there's a great opportunity for federal agencies to collaborate in maximizing the use of the different components of this emerging ecosystem today. And I hope that we can discuss those things. This is just a slide that came out of a lot of our recent discussions within OAIC around interacting major national programs, including the Future Advanced Computing Ecosystem, a lot of things that we fund in OAIC around that, the AI research agenda of the country that is sort of developing the automated capabilities to explore and advance the capabilities for using scientific research products in new ways to foster discovery. Among the programs I can mention, NSF is funding in our new TIP Directorate, Translational Innovation Partnerships, a very provocative new program called the Open Knowledge Network Initiative that among the various AI initiatives that NSF funds that are going to be doing some very interesting things in coming days with this. Finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention NIDR-D and the interagency collaborations that are happening within that space. A final thing that I wanted to move to now is to discuss the interagency coordination activities that are taking place in this very interesting group called the Subcommittee on Open Science. So this group has rather long acronymic title that I'll unpack. It's the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, which convenes the National Science and Technology Council, which in turn convenes the Subcommittee on Open Science, this long house that Jack built acronym. So the SOS is an interagency group comprised of 28 US federal agencies that are represented by some 96 individuals from those different agencies. And it has been a fascinating confluence of discussions and examinations of these issues that I'd like to highlight as really allowing agencies to engage in discussion and coordination on a very broad range of issues that bear on open science, ranging from extremely technical standards to sweeping policy issues. In addition to the subcommittee as a whole, which does meet on a monthly basis, the SOS is currently comprised of 4 working groups, one on data management and repositories, one on publications, one on the range of other infrastructural issues that come into play in this space, and finally, one on risk management. I serve on all of those working groups, and I'm the co-chair of the first 2. And I can say that there have been some fascinating new developments just within the last year or 2 within the SOS, some that I'll highlight here that I think represent a series of steady incremental alignment efforts that have been undertaken by these working groups. And some examples are a very provocative document that we've just issued called Desirable Characteristics of Repositories for Managing and Sharing Data Resulting from Federally Funded Research, a mouthful, but it basically sets forth core characteristics of repositories, and it is a great supplement or complement to the work that Bob is going to talk about momentarily. There was a survey of federal agency practices regarding persistent identifiers use and guidance that I hope will be issued publicly soon. There have been a series of documents around priorities for federal agencies' risk management efforts coming out of the risk working group. A draft OSTP statement on open science recommended practices, and finally, a new working group that I'm in the planning committee for on equity of access to data that is addressing very important issues of equity today in this space. Let me just wrap up with a call and a call out of the importance and need for continued interagency coordination efforts around a variety of issues, the responses to the broad issues that are related to our national scientific infrastructure require, I think, collaborative responses by many or most agencies. An example that I can cite is the recent interagency coordinated effort to respond to the National Security Policy Memorandum 33 on disclosure of involvement by researchers with foreign governments that has had all sorts of very interesting connections with identity management in the researcher space. And finally, a comment that the ecosystem of cyber infrastructure and data is now so complex and comprehensive that it mandates, I think, that we work together in closer and more coordinated ways. And I don't know, Melissa, if you want to do questions now or hold them to the end for all of us, but I will turn it over to you for at this point. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Martin. I think that we're going to save Q&A until the end so that we make sure that all three presenters have an opportunity. And then, maybe there's questions that all three of you will have a perspective on. But I do want to say that if folks do have questions for you or for any of the other presenters, to please feel free to go ahead and pop those into the Q&A, and we'll work through those as we get to the end of the presentations. Thank you so much, Dr. Halbert, for those wonderful comments. I'm going to turn next to Dr. Robert Hanisch, who is the director of the Office of Data and Informatics Material Measurement Laboratory at the National Institute of Standards and Technology in Gaithersburg, Maryland. I think we're noticing a trend in open science for really long titles of working groups and entities. In this role, he is responsible for improving data management and analysis practices and helping to assure compliance with national directives on open data access. Prior to coming to NIST in 2014, Dr. Hanisch was a senior scientist at the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore, Maryland, and was the director of the U.S. Virtual Astronomical Observatory, a program funded by NSF and NASA. In the past 20 years, Dr. Hanisch has led many efforts in the astronomy community in the area of information systems and services, focusing particularly on efforts to improve the accessibility and interoperability of data archives and catalogs. He was the first chair of the International Virtual Observatory Alliance Executive Committee for 2002 to 2003. And from 2000 to 2002, he served as Chief Information Officer at STSCI, overseeing all computing, networking, and information services for the Institute. Prior to that, he had oversight responsibility for the Hubble Space Telescope Data Archive and led the effort to establish the Multi-Mission Archive at Space Telescope as the Optical UV Archive Center for NASA astrophysics missions. He has served as chair of the Program Organizing Committee for the Astronomical Data Analysis Software and Systems Conferences, chair of the Space Science Data Systems Technical Working Group, chair of the Astrophysics Data Centers Coordinating Committee, chair of the Publications Board of the American Astronomical Society, chair of the AAS Working Group on Astronomical Software, and co-chair of the U.S. Decadal Survey Study Group on Computation, Simulation, and Data Handling. He completed his PhD in astronomy in 1981 at the University of Maryland, College Park. Give me 1 second. I will bring up your slide.
Wow, I sat in a lot of chairs, didn't I, Melissa? Thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm so pleased to be here. Let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing about data management at NIST, data management and sharing. And then I'm going to focus in particular on an initiative that I'm leading called the Research Data Framework. So if we go ahead, just a word about who we are at NIST. The National Institute of Standards and Technology is an agency as part of the Department of Commerce. It was known as the National Bureau of Standards until 1988, originally being founded in 1901. We're non-regulatory, so the standards part of NIST is really about building community consensus. But what we really are is an organization that practices the state of the art in measurement science and technology. There are over 100 national metrology institutes around the world. NIST is the one that represents the United States. is part of the meter agreement. And we work very closely in coordination with the BIPM, the International Bureau of Weights and Measures in Paris, which integrates activities for these 100 national organizations. We have about 5,000 staff, mostly at our headquarters in Gaithersburg, but also in campuses in Boulder, Colorado, Charleston, South Carolina, and at Brookhaven National Laboratory on Long Island. We're divided into 6 major research laboratories. I'm in the material measurement laboratory. My team is rather small. We have around 15 people, but we like to say that we punch above our weight group in terms of influence on data management practices. Next, please, Melissa. For example, my team has developed our science data portal and our public data repository. This is a website that provides access to all of our public facing data sets at NIST. The URL it front ends, as I say, access to all of our research publications, the data associated with our research publications. And it's an open source code base. So if an organization wants to work with us to set up some sort of clone of our repository infrastructure, we are more than happy to do that. The landing page for the data portal has categories of information, but you can type in any sort of search terms, materials that you're interested in, processes you're interested in. And as any modern search portal will do, we will provide for you the best matches for the search terms that you've entered. Next slide, please. Another thing that we are investing a lot of effort into is, sorry, I've got to get rid of my email here, is laboratory information management systems. Laboratory information management systems are tools that help us to collect data from diverse types of instrumentation, automatically extract metadata, and then catalog the metadata and data together in a centrally located file store. This is basically a way to assure that data are born fair, as Martin already alluded to, the FAIR principles. We want to make sure that the expensive instrumentation that we have leads to data products that are well documented, that have complete metadata, that allow data to be transported in space and time, so that not only is that data available for publication, but that data is available for successive generations, for postdocs, graduate students that come in and out of laboratories. So this is an in-house developed system. A very important feature of it is metadata extractors. Many vendors provide data in proprietary formats. This is really an impediment to open science. And so working with across our organization and with other organizations, we're developing tools that extract that metadata and open it up into open formats so that it can be much more easily reused. Next slide, I think we talk about here are standard reference data. NIST hosts a suite of databases, 65 currently. Most of them are free, some are subscription-based, but probably the most well-known one is our mass spectrometry database, which is embedded into essentially every mass spec instrument sold by vendors all around the world. Another very popular database we have is our chemistry webbook, which gets over 2 million views a month. And we have other, perhaps more specific databases, such as this X-ray photoelectron spectroscopy database, but still that gets 300,000 usages a month. These are data sets that are very, very highly vetted by experts on our staff at NIST, and that are part of a portfolio that Congress asked NIST to put together back in 1968 with the Standard Reference Data Act. So let me turn now to the topic of the day. If you go to the next slide, Melissa, which is this new initiative called the Research Data Framework. This is a project that I'm leading that started now about 2 years ago to develop what we would call a map of the research data space. Who are the actors? What are they doing? Where are they doing it? Why are they doing it? When are they doing it? We're trying to develop a dynamic guide for the stakeholders in research data to understand best practices, research data management, and dissemination. This is intended to be a resource for understanding costs and benefits and risks associated with research data management, particularly risks of not doing it well. But most importantly, it's a consensus document based on the inputs and conversations that we have amongst the stakeholders in research data. Why are we doing this? Well, as Martin already pointed out, the research data ecosystem is very complicated. Lots of players, various funding models, various models for sustainability. Decisions need to be made about how long to keep data, how to assess data quality, and ultimately, how do we measure the value of research data? Next, please. There are many stakeholders in the research data ecosystem, from government agencies, as Martin already spoke about and Ishwar will talk about after me, national laboratories, universities, data repositories, publishers, professional societies, international organizations, standards bodies, funders, industry, the private sector, researchers, and ultimately the general public. Next, please. So we're also worried about how we can best address global challenges. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals lay out 17 priority areas in which progress really requires integrating data from diverse resources that have not been designed to be interoperable, to work together. So through the research data framework and through initiatives such as we're discussing today, we're hoping to make it much easier to integrate data that hopefully will be born fair or made fair and will be much more amenable to addressing these global challenges. Next, please. So amongst the benefits of the research data framework are increasing research integrity by assuring that we have quality data and transparency into the research process, reducing costs and maximizing efficiency and best practices for data management, helping organizations understand their risk position through assessment of those positions and finding roadmaps for improvement, and increasing scientific discovery and innovation through the FAIR principles. We want data to be utilized beyond, repurposed beyond its original reason for being taken. In astronomy, for example, the Hubble Data Archive has produced more research papers by archival researchers than by the original principal investigators by a factor of 3. And the Sloan Digital Sky Survey has, I think at last count, well over 6,000 refereed publications, of which 5% come from the principal investigators and the rest are from members of the research community utilizing that data. So there's a tremendous lever arm that we can exploit by making data fair, open, and accessible. And the research data framework aims to help facilitate that transition. Next, please. So there's clearly a national and international need. We see data growing at exponential rates. As we've seen, data management is complex and can be confusing. If we don't manage data well, there can be dire social and economic consequences. And so we at NIST felt that the United States needs a coordinated effort to establish research data infrastructure, but also recognizing that research data are really global in nature. And so international collaboration and coordination is necessary. NIST, we believe, is well positioned to lead such a project. That's our business. Our business is consensus building through being a neutral convener of diverse communities. The standards that NIST helps to develop are not imposed by NIST. They are orchestrated and coordinated by NIST, bringing all of the interested parties together. Next, please. So we started this with a pilot program where we will provide an overall guide to the actors and stakeholders in the research data space. This is not a new thing for NIST. The cybersecurity framework, which many of you may be aware of, is the model. Again, this is about community consensus, not a NIST imposition. But someone picking up the research data framework should be able to say, oh, if I am if I am a chief data officer, if I am a librarian, if I am an academic publisher, then these are the things that I need to know about. These are the organizations, these are the practices, these are the regulations that affect my job. We kicked this off already now, almost 2.5 years ago, with a scoping workshop in December 2019, where we had selected stakeholders representing all these diverse communities. Next, please. This resulted in a preliminary framework core publication in which we divide the research data lifecycle into 6 major phases. Each of these phases has categories or topics and subcategories or subtopics, and they are backed up by informative records. This publication is available at the DOI here, and these slides will be available for people to review later to pick up the references. Next, please. So these 6 core phases or functions are envisioning, planning, generating and acquiring, processing and analyzing, using and reusing, and preserving and discarding. And I'm sure many of you have seen different models for the research data lifecycle. This is but one of a number, but we think that these 6 categories pretty well characterize the research data lifecycle. Next, please. So envisioning is, what is the high-level course of action that an organization lays out in order to achieve its goals? Planning is preparing an organization for effective research data management. Generating and acquiring, this is how do you get your data, whether it's from experiment or from computation, whether it is acquired through survey vehicles or from other organizations. Processing and analyzing is, what do you do on that data in order to extract information? Then sharing and reusing, using and reusing outlines how the raw and the processed data are disseminated and used both within the originating organization or to other organizations outside. And preserve and discard is about how do organizations make decisions about end of life, about retention, and about ultimately safe disposal. Next, please. Just as an example, for Envision, the functions is Envision. The categories include things like data governance, both strategic and qualitative, and legal and regulatory, community engagement, data culture, and those are subdivided into these subcategories: data vision, data policy, data privacy and ethics, data inventories, the FAIR principles. How does an organization value data and data professionals? And what are the roles and responsibilities within an organization around data management? Each of these 6 categories has a similar breakdown of categories and subcategories. I'm not going through them here in the interest of time, but those slides will be available in the slide deck. Next, please. So where are we at? We held 2 plenary workshops last fall. One, which we call a vertical, focusing on a particular research discipline, which is materials science. This was chosen because NIST actually has its own large portfolio in materials science, and so it's a field that we know very well. The other we call a horizontal, reaching across to research universities, their libraries, and scholarly publishers. And so we've seen very strong interest and engaged participation from our stakeholder groups, including government agencies, professional societies, and trade organizations, the scholarly publishing community. And I want to reach out and give credit specifically to the Association of American Universities, AAU, the Association of Public Land Grant Universities, APLU, and the Association of Research Libraries, ARL, who were basically cohorts in planning our engagement with the research universities. We updated the preliminary framework to version 1.1 based on the inputs that we had from these participants, and the URL to that updated document is here. Next, please. So what we're doing now is we're holding 15 stakeholder workshops, each one focused on a specific stakeholder role: senior executives, researchers, scholarly publishers, librarians, and so forth. These will be 2-hour-long workshops with small groups coming up in the next 2 months or so. And these will allow us to develop profiles for each stakeholder role. Essentially, this is a list of the responsibilities, the interfaces that people in these different research responsibilities need to know about. And we'll be asking the participants to help us define these profiles. We will update the core as necessary. And we will be asking people, where are you an influencer and where are you influenced? What influences you and where do you have influence on others? Based on the inputs we get from these stakeholder workshops, we'll develop another iteration of the framework and finalize a set of profiles for these different job roles and responsibilities. Next, please. For example, one back, so a profile for a senior executive might look like this. This is very preliminary, but in terms of data governance, strategic and qualitative, they would have a role in defining a data vision and data policy, maybe less so about data quality and data stewardship. They would have a role in data privacy, less so in the details of the data inventory and so forth. So we will work out the various roles and responsibilities and their relative priorities for each of these 15 different roles or profiles that we are working on. Next, please. I just want to point out our illustrious steering committee. Bonnie Carroll from CoData as the chair of the steering committee. We have representatives from government agencies, from universities. You'll note Martin is also one of our steering committee members. And these people have been extremely valuable in advising us and setting priorities and our strategy for developing the framework. And to sum up, I think is next. We've been successful in building community interest and engagement with diverse stakeholders, both on a national and international basis. Of course, there are challenges in pulling this all together with limited resources and being timely and controlling scope and scale. But our next steps are to hold these stakeholder workshops. We will, in the fall timeframe, be soliciting community input through a formal RFI in the Federal Register. And then we will hold a plenary workshop in the fall or early 2023 timeframe to validate the updated framework and publish version 2. We are open to community inputs. Any of you who are listening to this presentation who would like to participate, please contact me. The next slide has my contact information and those of my co-leaders of the framework. I hope that this framework initiative is something that interests you, and we would be more than willing to have you participate in our upcoming workshops and help us develop these profiles. And at that point, I think I'm finished. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hanish, for that wonderful overview of NIST's activities and the research data framework. I know that I'm really excited to see some of the outputs. For our next presenter, I'm going to hand over the microphone microphone in the slide deck to Dr. Ishwar Chandra Malishwaran. I'm so sorry. Who is a lead program director in the Office of Data Science Strategy at the National Institutes of Health. He provides leadership, strategic guidance, and coordination of trans NIH FAIR data science programs driven by researcher needs and emerging technologies. They include adoption of FAIR data principles, initiatives to establish a modernized biomedical data and repository ecosystem, as well as establish community partnerships to enhance education, adoption, and implementation of FAIR practices. Give me 1 second, I'll bring up your slide deck.
Thank you, Melissa, for the kind introduction and also inviting me to this, this forum to share some of the activities that are going on at NIH. As Melissa mentioned, I am in the Office of Data Science Strategy that is situated in the, if you can move on to the next slide. Situated in the Office of Data Science Strategy, which was newly formed in 2018 and was intended to lead the implementation of the NIH strategic plan. And if you move on to the next slide. We're situated in the Office of the Director at the NIH. And for most of you who might already know, NIH is the nation's largest medical research agency supporting scientific discoveries that studies that turn discovery into health. We have a budget of over $40+ billion supporting, spent over about 50,000 grants, contracts, and other mechanisms distributed to over 230,000 researchers across several institutions within the United States as well as abroad. The office itself provides leadership and coordination to really implement the strategic plan of data science, which came about in 2018, given the volume of data that was being generated, particularly from very many big data projects. Our focus is to develop and implement NIH's vision for a modernized and integrated biomedical data ecosystem, to enhance the diverse and talented pool of data science researchers and expertise within as well as outside the NIH, and build strategic partnerships to develop and disseminate advanced technologies and methods, not only from the community, but also from our sister agencies, and kind of find applications for those. Moving on to the next slide. Many such efforts are under the auspices of the strategic plan for data science are ongoing currently to build and maintain a data management and sharing infrastructure for NIH. And as Martin mentioned, it's impossible to kind of do justice to all the different efforts that are going on under this. And I'll touch on some of these things under these 5 major pillars of data infrastructure, the data ecosystem itself, analytics and tools. Of course, importantly, the workforce and capacity building to address the area of data science, and stewardship and sustainability across the board. The next slide just talks about that this is not just, we are a small office and we're a catalyzing office that works across the institutes. We have 27 different institutes, but we have about 23 externally facing institutes that participate on many funded programs and activities. And so we have about over 200 people now. Actually, this slide is a little old, participating from across 23 different institutes to in all of the implementation of these programs. So kudos in advance to all of those contributing these activities. So the next slide basically addresses and touches on one of the infrastructural aspects, and a key one, which is the policy for data management and sharing that went into effect, actually was published in 2021, although it's been in the works for the last couple of years with community input as well. And this is an update or an enhancement to the initial 2003 data management and sharing policy, wherein this policy requires researchers to prospectively plan, and that's the key word over here, is to plan for how scientific data will be preserved and shared, beyond the life of that award. And what this involves in as a simple step is to develop and submit a data management and sharing plan that will outline how this data and any accompanying metadata or associated information about the data will be managed and shared for not just for preservation, but for also potentially reuse to increase the impact of this data. There will be some budgetary allocation associated with this, and this applies across the board to all research conducted at NIH as well as funded by NIH. The policy does not apply, however, to research data and other activities that do not generate scientific data, including training, some other infrastructure development, and non-research activities. But for the most part, it would apply. So the next slide basically addresses the underlying premise of this strategic plan and the policy itself is the FAIR principles that both Martin and Bob alluded to and addressed, which is basically making our data coming out of NIH funded research findable, accessible to begin with, interoperable and reusable, that are outlined in the FAIR guiding principles for scientific data management and stewardship paper that came out in 2016. And although it seems like it's been only 5 years, there's been a tremendous amount of uptake and adoption of this across the community, even beyond the biomedical industry. But what I'll focus on is what's happening in the biomedical sciences. The next slide talks about the next big area where we are providing some large-scale infrastructure support, looking at NIH data repositories. It supports a variety of data repositories and knowledge bases of differing sizes that come in different levels of complexity as well as maturity. And what we're trying to do is address some of these FAIR trust principles and look at the metrics of these data repositories or data resources as a whole, and see how we can bolster and boost these to have the greatest impact. So next slide basically talks about how we are positioning these data resources for better sharing. And so given that these data resources are key enablers of modern biomedical research, we're looking at this in a holistic way, and we have targeted efforts by way of actively funding development of biomedical data repositories and knowledge bases, be they new ones to fill gaps, or they be to sustain existing ones that have tremendous uptake in use. Of course, before that, we're taking a look at what repositories and knowledge bases we are funding to date across the spectrum, which is a daunting task to look at, a portfolio as large as what NIH has, and to bolster and boost them to either implement measures to look at improving these databases to address the desirable characteristics for data repositories that Martin mentioned, which came out of interagency effort across all the agencies led by OSTP, which included and are part of our new policy itself, to improve the general quality of data and readiness of data to be used for large-scale analysis beyond for what they were originally generated. And of course, enhancing and improving sustainability and reusability of the software used to generate this data to better serve for open science across the board. So in addition to these two activities, as Martin alluded to, that some of the generalist repositories and other resource services that have come about, we're trying to find targeted ways to incorporate them into our larger ecosystem. So we'll quickly step through some of these in the subsequent slides. And the next slide basically addresses the modest supplementary funding that we've given the breadth of existing repositories to address three specific things: the desirable characteristics that are outlined in the NIH notice that basically determine what a good repository should be, and to strengthen the adoption of FAIR principles across the board, both for the repositories and knowledge bases themselves, as well as the data within. To strengthen the adoption of trust principles that are driven again internationally, led by one of my colleagues and co-workers, which may include structured plans to pursue various certifications to establish these data repositories. And trust really stands for looking at the transparency of data, responsibility, user focus, sustainability, and the technology that goes into supporting these repositories. Then there's a paper associated with this that came out sometime in 2018 or 2019. I don't remember the exact year. And lastly, that these repositories adopt and enhance best practices of metrics and really look into evaluating the usage, utility, and the impact of the data within these resources. So we have several repositories that are qualified to fund it for this, so they can kind of improve themselves and then come on to kind of more longer term funding for repositories and knowledge bases that we're doing, which is addressed in the next slide. As a dedicated program really focused on strengthening and building this resource as a whole to support investigator-initiated sustainable data resource development driven by critical research needs that focuses on 4 major things: to fill a scientific gap and demonstrate a unique value proposition for the resource, encourage the adoption of good data management practices, engage the research community primarily to both contribute as well as use the data and govern and overall govern the data life cycle and its preservation, with the idea of not just spawning new data resources, but also looking at how it's being used and looking at ways not only to preserve but also to sunset things as some things become obsolete. Why is this program important for us? Because we hope that this will help reduce and eliminate some of the silos that are established by our own programs and lower the barriers for data sharing. It's expected to allow for discovery and reuse of the data to incentivize researchers to kind of look at it from the point of view of reusing even when they're contributing data. Most importantly, operationally, for us to disentangle these data resources from research projects, because some of them have evolved over time as part of research projects and grown into resources that have become difficult to sustain within the research projects themselves. And lastly, to optimize the efficiency of operations and costs in general towards longer term sustainability. As part of this program, we have some flagship databases such as the UniProt and bioportals that are existing ones, and some new, as well as the viral taxonomy database that has become critically important in this day and age of COVID, as well as new repositories to fill a gap, such as paraneurotrauma that is related to brain injury data sets. So this is quite a flagship program that we have that recently got approved for renewal as well at our council. So the next slide talks about a sister program that addresses the generalist repositories. And so as Martin mentioned, repositories like Dryad, Figshare, Dataverse, Mendeley Data, Open Science Framework, and a new database called Vively that focuses on clinical trial data, individual patient clinical trial data, have all come into prominence recently to support various needs for better data management and sharing amongst the community. And so we've kind of, we ran a workshop and looked at what some of the things that these data generalist repositories could work on together to address, to even kind of further lower the barrier for data sharing amongst our NIH funded grantees. So we solicited applications from these repositories to basically look at and improve themselves further than what they are by implementing consistent capabilities, whether they be associated with generalist repositories or just capabilities that they have developed themselves, but common things that are kind of below the value line to kind of work on them together so that they don't each have to reinvent the wheel. To create better access and discovery of NIH funded data within and between them, as well as conduct outreach and train people not only on how to use these databases to find NIH funded data, but also on simply fair data practices in general, so that everybody can think about this at the onset during their planning stages and data collection stages, as Bob alluded to, so that they can adopt some of the principles of the research data framework as they're planning their hypothesis-driven research. And we hope that these generalist repositories will engage the research community, and there will be many activities that they will be advertising, and I would encourage you to kind of be on the lookout for them and engage in appropriate ways. Again, this is important for us because we hope that this would make data sharing for our NIH funded grantees easier, improve the discoverability of data for others who want to find data that is relevant to advancing their research. And we hope that some of the impact out of this would be increased reproducibility of research, which is suffering quite tremendously these days, as well as encourage secondary use of the data to demonstrate the impact of that data. So this is again another flagship program that we launched in the January of 2022 with many different activities planned in the year. So the next slide basically touches on, in addition to data resources, we have many flagship programs, and this is just one that I'm calling on to the Bridge to AI program that came out of the recommendations of the advisory committee to the director of the NIH to basically make our data AI much more AI ready. And of course, there are efforts to kind of bootstrap existing data sets that are out there to make them AI ready. Certain things just cannot be done. And so in a grander scale, this program is actually in the midst of being launched and the awards being made as we speak, where the goal is to kind of use biomedical and behavioral research grand challenges to generate large scale flagship data sets that would support AI and machine learning efforts over here. Of course, alongside, we want to emphasize the ethical best practices, which will become a front and center. Also ensure that there's diversity and equity in the approaches adopted by the methods proposed in these projects, and make them all AI ML friendly in general. So in addition, of course, to these large-scale programs such as Bridge to AI, we have several other programs such as that focused on pain and addiction called HEAL. We have the All of Us program, which is an ambitious effort to collect over 1 million patients' data across the United States, as well as, of course, the familiar Cancer Moonshot program that is generating. And there are several others, but this is just a few. So we have many. These are kind of large infrastructural efforts to generate very large data sets that could be used across the board. The next slide makes the slide shift into the infrastructure itself. NIH has this initiative called the STRIDES initiative. It's an acronym for Science, Technology, Research Infrastructure for Discovery, Experimentation, and Sustainability. Indeed, it's a mouthful, but it's quite a very exciting, given that it's a partnership with our 3 big cloud providers in Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, and the Amazon AWS, to provide storage and computational capabilities for our data sets and our researchers. In addition, of course, as part of this, they provide training and education about the capabilities of the platform, and as well as access to innovative technologies that they are developing, as well as technical support. You can learn more about this on cloud.nih.gov, and it's open to all researchers to leverage some of the discounted pricing for storage and compute, but also for adopting the various technological capabilities that they offer in accelerating their own research. The next slide is just a numbers game in terms of where we are leveraging the STRIDES program, that we have a large amount of data, petabytes of data that's available, one hell of a lot of computes that have been leveraged, and it's just a set of metrics that demonstrate that we've been able to do a lot with spending a lot less money through the approaches adopted and incentivized by the cloud program itself. The next slide specifically gives an example of how PubMed Central Article Datasets, which is a large collection, is now available on the cloud to enhance machine learning access to this data set over there. And then I think it talks about this data sets collectively spans about 4 million of PubMed Central, 7 million full text scientific articles. So the next slide talks about how do we create an integrated cloud-based ecosystem. There are many such platforms that are coming up with these large programs that the large programs are standing up, holding a vast amount of data. And so the NIH Cloud Platform Interoperability effort basically aims to establish and implement guidelines as well as technical standards to empower end user analysis across all of these platforms. And basically the basic premise over here is that these various data portals can connect to various workplaces, and the various workplaces can access data from these various data portals, so that you can basically take the tools to the data much more easily and provide that ability to go back and forth in not only just cloud environments, but also combination of cloud as well as on-prem environments. And of course, when you have in the next slide, talks about yet another flagship infrastructure effort called the Research Authentication Services, which is primarily, simply said, a single sign-on for people. When you have so many data sets and tools across these different platforms, we definitely don't want researchers to have to sign on to each of these things and have different access requirements for each of these. So we have this huge effort across the NIH called the Research Authentication Service that enables you to have, leverage identity providers and basic capabilities for researchers to sign on. And along with signing on and recognizing their identity, the data sets that they're authorized to access and have been approved to always goes along with them as part of their passport and visas across the system, so that they can easily traverse all the different systems, access relevant data sets, and compute on them. The next slide talks about the software pillar that I mentioned. We have an excellent partnership with the National Science Foundation and the Smart and Connected Health Program to accelerate innovations in computer and information science and engineering to support change and transformation in health and medicine over here. And we have several different areas that are focused on, and we're in the process of this next round of awards that are going on. And this is, I think, a long-term partnership between NIH and NSF. The next slide talks about looking at supplementing existing software. So that what we're focusing on is just looking at research software as a discipline in itself. And we want to be able to kind of identify various sets of software that are embedded right now as part of our research R01 grants, and the smaller grants that are used one-off just for those experiments, to extract them, to make them more robust, sustainable, portable, and scalable. And we are supplementing these awards through several supplemental opportunities. And I've been doing this for the last about 3 years now, and this has had a tremendous, it's been tremendously popular and successful with many requests coming in. The idea is to kind of pull these softwares out, to be able to repurpose them, and also ensure that their longer term sustainability in a manner that we're able to build communities around these software. And of course, alongside with this, we are developing best practices for sharing research software as outlined in the next slide. That we put out these guidelines for biomedical researchers and NIH funded ones, particularly to understand what these best practices are, and to be able to think about developing software in a manner that can be shared, that are open and citable with appropriate metadata, so that others can actually make better use of it. So making a pivot to the next pillar of infrastructure support is in training. We have several efforts underway, and these are two summer programs that are focused on data science summer programs for graduate students, one led by the Intramural Training Office, the other one in partnership with the Civic Digital Fellowship called the Coding It Forward program, which has been tremendously popular, where fellows apply to the Civic Digital Fellowship and come into our offices, both intramural and extramural, to take on challenging projects, leveraging their computational and physical sciences skill sets and applying it to answer biomedical problems and questions. The next slide talks about the Data Scholars Program, which is a different program, which is a 2-year program where we invite experts with experience to come in and address challenging problems that we have. And so the 2022 applications for Data Scholars are now open, and I would encourage you to share this widely for people interested to apply. And the website itself outlines some of the questions that the institutes and centers want answered and expertise in Data Scholars. The applications are open until May 27th, 2022. That's right. So the next slide talks about yet another flagship program that we launched last year. Yes, last year. called the Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning Consortium to Advance Health Equity and Research Diversity. As Martin mentioned, that equity has become a really important issue. We really want to, the goal of this program is to enhance the participation and representation of researchers and communities currently that are not adequately represented in developing AI, ML models and methods and approaches. So that's the main focus of this. This is a huge effort that has been awarded to the coordinating center to help address both leadership and overall coordination, but also bring in other sub-awards through data that focus on data science training, that focus on data and research core capabilities, as well as infrastructure development. And you can learn more about this, this program on the site. We're also currently recruiting some leadership for this team as well, program officers for this team. So moving on to the next thing about the various community-driven activities real quickly, I will just touch on is we're partnering with the Data Curation Network, which is basically an event series. The Data Curation Network is a network of librarians that work together to enhance curation of data and improvement of the data quality. And so we're really encouraging our biomedical researchers to understand the services available through the libraries, leverage the expertise in the data curators through their libraries. And so there's a whole event series that's to educate all the different stakeholders, not just the researchers, but also the program officers, the repository owners, as well as the curators themselves, to teach and learn from each other using a model that the DCN had developed called Curated in Itself, which stands to a simple process of just checking, understanding, requesting missing information, augmenting and updating it, transforming any formats and files, evaluating and finally documenting all of this and making it available so people can better all the training material developed from this would be made available as self-paced training content on our website itself. The next is the data sharing. The next slide talks about the data sharing and reuse seminar that we've been hosting for the last 2 years, where we basically showcase innovative approaches where researchers have either shared data or reused data. We also kind of help the institute showcase some of the advanced activities and programs that they have. We have a next upcoming seminar just tomorrow, where Dr. Jayashree Kalpathy Kramer will be speaking on her work in leveraging data use from multi-institutional cohorts, which is not quite easy to do, and incentivizing data sharing to better support discovery from such efforts. I'd encourage you to go to the website, sign on, and disseminate this as well across the board. The next slide talks about an absolutely exciting prize by way of incentivizing our research community. We launched this just yesterday, and it's basically a challenge where the power of data sharing and reuse can be demonstrated by applicants in biomedical, biological and biomedical sciences. The prize purse is up to $500,000 spread across 12 monetary prizes that would recognize teams' achievement in how they have innovatively shared data or reuse data. And so the website outlines the application process. So I would encourage you to share this widely amongst your institutions as well. Lastly, just to conclude, I just wanted to kind of say that given all of these 5 pillars and the various activities that I just simply touched on, it's really kind of helps evolve this distributed ecosystem for fair data management and sharing, where we have, of course, the domain-specific repositories that we are supporting today, that we're helping enhance and bootstrap to adopt the best practices as a first step that are outlined in our web presence for Biomedical Informatics Committee, that is a trans-NIH committee that collates and curates this information. And the rest of the efforts that we have support a scaled implementation depending on the size and the volume of data sets, ranging from, of course, the PubMed Central for small data sets that are directly associated with publications, the generalist repositories that we touched on for other things that don't quite have a home, data sets that don't quite have a home, and also the partnership with the cloud providers to support very large scale data sets coming out of big data programs themselves. So in conclusion, just to kind of the next slide summarizes that, our very simplistic and maybe oversimplified outcomes over here are really to make it easier for researchers to share the data that they're generating and to think about this at the beginning of their research life cycle and not at the end. And then think about it from the point of view of improving discoverability of their own data so that they can get credit and have a greater impact on that data. Make the data associated with publications readily available and more importantly, reproducible. Avoid the duplication of data so that one doesn't have to take the data to multiple places in order for it to be more discoverable, and that these are structured in a way and indexed appropriately so that they can be accessed no matter any one of the standard longer term preservation areas that you make it available. And ultimately have NIH researchers think about being both contributors and consumers. And we hope that through this process will encourage better data management through the research lifecycle and lower the barrier for sharing the data. And with that, I will end over here. The next slide simply says that this is just reiterating the focus of the office itself is to establish this modernized, integrated, fair biomedical data system. You can follow the office at NIH Data Science, or you can reach out to us with ideas, thoughts at datascience@nih.gov. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ishwar, and Martin and Bob as well for those wonderful updates on all of the efforts that your agencies are engaging in to create and bolster the infrastructure necessary to support data management and sharing. I'll stop sharing any slides now as we move on to sort of the question and answer discussion portion of the session today, and just invite anyone who has questions to pop those into the Q&A, and we'll work through answering those. I think one question that had come in that I think I saw Martin typed out an answer to, but I think would be really interesting to pose to Bob and Ishwar as well, or Martin, if you wanted to add any other comments, is that making data accessible to others is costly, especially the better that you do it. And, I think both on a macro and a micro level, this means less resources for research. So as your agencies are devoting resources into developing this infrastructure, that means, less portion of the budget maybe that is available for individual research projects. And then for individual research projects, making sure to set aside a portion of each project budget to support, data management and best practices, may be a hard choice when you're faced with somewhat limited resources. And so I'm wondering if you all could comment on how to manage this trade-off. How do we maximize the value of these investments?
I can start something and say, and others can chime in. So the one thought that occurs to me is that, in fact, I was at a different symposium last week and this issue came up. And I think one way to address this would be to start early, kind of in the research lifecycle, and thinking about it early on. So I think the cost factor hits you when you think about it at the end, that you've done everything and now you need to share it, and there's a cost associated with that. But if you're thinking about it right from the early on planning stage, yes, there may be overall a slightly incremental increase in cost, but the effort in itself and the overall cost won't be as prohibitive to be able to share. So when you're thinking about it, is like, how do I collect the data? What is the right equipment? What kind of electronic digital capture system do I have to have for the raw data? How do I process and store that information? And what are the best places for the longer term preservation beyond the life of my grant? And I think oftentimes people get into this conundrum of supporting it incredibly well within the constraints and support provided by the funding. And then when the funding ends, they have to think about, okay, how do I kind of support this? So I think we are trying to decouple that effort, and starting early on and looking at it from the research life cycle could help reduce some of the challenges associated with that cost.
Yeah, I fully agree with Ishwar. I've done some studies about this in astronomy and also more recently at NIST. And I think this whole problem could be solved for a few % of what the major funding agencies invest in research. a network of discipline-based data centers that are recompeted on a regular basis, tools that are integrated into the data lifecycle at the get-go, just as Ishwar said. This does not have to be expensive, and it does not have to be seen as a question of doing less research. In fact, if we do this well, we'll do more research, we'll do it better. The research outputs will be more accessible for reanalysis and repurposing than what we're doing now by a factor of order of magnitude. We can do it. We can do it with the right resolve and with a very modest investment of resources compared to the overall investment that we see of what 8.8 billion from NSF and 35-40 billion from NIH. We can do this. We can solve this problem. We have the technology. We need the resolve to do it.
I completely agree with both Ishwar and Bob. I think the challenge in implementing that vision is coming to a consensus on how to do it and the strategies for doing it. And I think that is one of the key things that we need to grapple with in coming years. But I completely agree with you, Bob. I think that is, it's often seen in this, I think, a false dichotomy of, either we're going to give out all the money eventually for maintenance of data that's been created before, or we fund the new creation of data. I think that's a false dichotomy. I think it is a matter of coming up with an effective strategy that is coordinated for preservation of research results.
In fact, anecdotally, last week at that symposium, somebody commented like, we need to go from smart watches and smartphones to smart labs that are collecting data, in a way without you knowing that information is being collected, as Bob alluded to his limb system and how data gets captured.
We're still starting at electronic lab notebooks. So Ishwar, this one is particularly, I think, for you, but still on the topic of cost. And you did mention a couple different funding opportunities and supplements, but are you aware of plans on the NIH side to offer admin supplements for individual grants to help cover the cost of data management?
Yes, so it's a multi-part answer to that question over there. So the first thing is I did mention about supplements to help, make data fair in general, which means, share it or make it findable, accessible, and trouble-reducible, anything that you think was most needed. We have many efforts across many programs that are starting to do that. New programs are starting to incorporate that, and people can request a budget as part of that new program itself. So you have both supplement awards as well as new programs allowing you to kind of build some reasonable costs. Of course, the reasonable cost depends on, many different factors, but there is definitely allowable costs associated with making a data being able to better manage data and share the data.
So Joshua Rosenblum, I think added, I'm not sure there's a question here. I think it's a comment relevant to the cost issue, that there's agreement with Bob that better tools technology will help, but this is also going to involve a large social challenge, training scholars at more advanced career stages about how to use these tools, and solving incentive problems and ensuring that scholars get appropriate credit for the creative aspects of data creation and not just the analysis of data. And thank you very much, Josh, for that. I don't know if there's either any of you would like to respond to that thought.
Sorry, an incoming phone call interrupted my internet connection for the moment. Can you repeat that?
No worries. I think that Josh was commenting on some of the other needs in terms of workforce development and training, which I think, some of the activities that Ishwar mentioned in terms of workforce development might be relevant, or Bob. I know that that is considered as part of the research data framework. And in addition to just data centers, it's also staff training.
No, I think there's a really important new role that is evolving in the research data ecosystem, that of data steward, or we have to take this seriously, right? It's not just training of our upcoming, graduate students and postdocs. It's understanding that data management is a profession. It's a profession that needs recognition, that needs status, and that researchers need credit, not just for their research papers, but for the research outcomes, which are the data sets that they produce and that they curate. So we're talking about a change in the whole societal fabric of the way that research is done. Is part of it, recognition is part of it. I'm part of this National Academy's roundtable on aligning incentives for open science. Tenure practices, retention practices at universities are part of it. We're at the onset of a sea change. It's a sea change that is going to be facilitated by organizations like Martin talked about, the Subcommittee on Open Science, getting government aligned properly, but also getting major research universities aligned. Are just as important in the private sector as they are in academia. Maybe there's a corporate firewall around it, but private industry needs to share data within their corporate boundaries, just as we want to do openly in academia. So I just can't say how important these changes and these initiatives are. It's a sea change that needs to happen, and we can make it happen. We can help it happen. We can be catalysts for change, and that's certainly what I see my job as these days, is being that catalyst. I went off topic. I'm sorry, but
No,
I feel pretty strongly
those are
about
great
this.
comments. I do note that we're just a few minutes away from the end of the session, and that I think Ishwar and Martin provided some typed answers to this one, but I thought it was a really good question. So perhaps we can end our session asking each of you if you could comment. What do you think all of this means? Well, the real question entered was, what does this mean for the individual NIH or NSF grant recipient, or what does this mean for the individual researcher? If so, I guess in the research data framework terms, if I am a researcher, what do I need to know?
Well, I'll just take a stab at that quickly, which is the onus is on us as funders, as government agencies, to build infrastructure, facilitate that infrastructure such that data sharing, data management becomes easy. Just as easy as getting to the internet, doing anything that we do nowadays that we take for granted, such that people are not spending their time data wrangling, they're not spending their time trying to figure out what the columns mean in Excel, that it's all there. And once it's there, then people can do science. That's what we want. We want people to do science, and we want people to share and be open about their science. We can get there. It's not, we need to relieve the burden on the individual researcher and build an infrastructure that allows researchers to do science. And the data management will happen as a natural part of that process.
Here. I think that is exactly the right point, Bob. So I spent a lot of time working with NSF, the NSF policy office on this stuff, and reducing researcher burden in this process is a central question that we start and end with, really. If it is an impossible task that we're setting, researchers in managing and sharing their data, then it's a fool's errand. There's no point in telling them to do things that they're never going to have time or the ability to do. We've got to figure out mechanisms and strategies for making this manageable, for making this easy to understand, and easy to take advantage of as well. To do that, though, requires an awful lot of consensus building and expectation building, though.
And then that's exactly why I put that oversimplified answer. The researcher not to try to do it themselves, And if they don't know anything else, go to their library and or the network of resources that are available to say, how do I develop a data management plan? And there's an incredible amount of information there that you could get drowned in, but I think starting at the libraries for every researcher would be a great way to kind of simplify it and keep it kind of contained for them, and that would hold them in really good stead for the long run. And we're really hoping that more and more people, as they develop these data management plans and are putting some thought into, if I needed the data, what do I look for it, and think about that in terms of generating, collecting, and then sharing it, then it becomes kind of second nature. So you're not thinking. If you have to think hard about what you need to do, then we're not doing something right. But I think the libraries would be able to guide them to start with that. And hopefully, if we have this culture of more people sharing their data management plans, there'll be a lot of teaching and learning amongst the community themselves. And that's where groups like FASEB have set up a help desk. They're setting up salons for people to come in and visit it and kind of informally learn and teach and share their experiences so that they're not doing this alone.
Well, thank you. I think the idea of making sure that this is easy and we're reducing burden on researchers so that they can spend more time doing science. It's music to our FDP ears. We're all about reducing burden and more researchers doing science, spending more time doing science than on administrative things. So thank you so much, Ishwar, Bob, and Martin, for these wonderful presentations and wonderful comments. This is going to conclude our session for the day. And I think the next session up, Sarah, though, please correct me if I'm wrong. It's Data Day or Data Afternoon at the FDP. And our next session is going to be the Data Stewardship, Data Transfer and Use Agreement session at 3 o'clock, I believe. So thank you so much, Ishwar, Bob, and Martin again. And thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks.